Hi everybody, welcome back to my garden. My name's Vanessa and I turned our yard into our own little happy place at home here in Zone 7B, Virginia. And I want to give you whatever tools I have to help you do the same. Today, I want to share with you exactly how I went about creating our backyard into our own little happy place at home all at once. I feel like that's what most of us want, right? We don't want just a flower bed here or there. We want to create a little oasis where our family can find refuge. We want to be able to walk meandering paths to a little vegetable garden. And we want to be able to cut flowers to make beautiful bouquets throughout the growing season and bring it inside. But most of all, I think what we want is to be able to create a space that we can all enjoy together as a family. So today I'm going to share with you how I took my backyard from looking like this. I mean, there was nothing exceptional about it. It looked about average, and we turned it to looking like this in about a 3 months period. And by we, I mean I did this work mainly by myself. And so I want to show you the tips and tricks that I use to be able to do that. I think it will help you. So I encourage you to watch the entire video because I'm going to share with you the easy method that I use to do this because I did this mostly by myself. And I'm going to share with you the resources that I used to do this relatively cheap. I think at the end of this project, I had maybe $120 into it. That's not including the plants, but we're going to talk about why it's helpful to hold off on planting anyway. And lastly, I'm going to explain to you why choosing this method is actually beneficial for the start of your garden to be able to give a proper boost to your soil. Okay, so to help you understand how I came up with this, I need to tell you a story. I was at a library one time where they had this huge, big, beautiful lawn that somehow looked different to me. It looked more sculpted or more tidy or more put together. Like it's not just any other lawn. You look at it and you're like, something feels very park-like about this. It looked structured somehow. It looked as if somebody had put thought into it. And how does somebody put thought into lawn? I kept thinking. I remembered like my kids and I would just walk around and explore. There weren't any like special plants there. It was mainly grass. And I remember thinking, what is going on? Why does it look so nice? And it dawned on me that the reason it looked nice is because they had done something that I think you can do yourself to immediately take your backyard and turn it into something nice without a ton of effort. They had defined their grass. Let me explain to you what this means. So most of us, we have lawn from one end of the property, from the fence line on this side to the fence line on the other side, and we spend a lot of time mowing it, but there is no definition at all. It's just lawn that bleeds over to our neighbor's lawn, or it might bleed over to our neighbor's bushes, but there's no definition. The minute you add a flower bed to that lawn, it looks defined. Now, I need you to stop and think with me for a minute. I'm not insinuating that you need to go out and buy a ton of plants and plant them in flower beds. What I'm suggesting is that you create flower beds, you mulch them very nicely with the intention of planting them later, because your main purpose is not to create flower beds, but to give definition to your grass. Because the moment you give definition to your grass, you create intentionality, and all of a sudden you have a park feel. All of a sudden the yard has come alive. So, this is my advice for you. In order for this to work, you have to first have a plan for what it is that you want to put in your yard. I have an entire video dedicated to why it's important to create gardens. And in that video, I explain the steps that you should take to decide how it is you want to lay out your garden beds. I highly encourage you watch this video because you first have to have something on paper for what you want your backyard to look like before you can start this process. Once you have that design process on paper, you can now use this cheat code essentially to lay it out relatively quickly. But once you know what it is that you want to add to your yard, this is your next step. You need to define whatever grass you do have. And if it's not grass, like if for some reason you cannot get grass to grow on your property, define pathways and add gravel if that's what you want, or add brick. But lay that foundation. The key here is you have to edge these flower beds very nicely, because we have to remember that our main purpose for using this method is not to create the flower beds themselves, though that is a nice byproduct. And there are advantages of starting the flower beds this early that we'll talk about in just a little bit. However, What we're mainly after here is we're defining our grass, we're defining our pathways, we're giving structure and purpose to our yard. And structure and purpose is like 60 to 70% of the process. For myself, I was able to do this relatively quickly using two things. I used cardboard to smother out the grass in places where I didn't want it, and then I used wood chips to be able to mulch it. This process is called sheet mulching or creating a no-dig flower bed. But the idea is that you don't first have to remove your grass. You can just smother it out and kill it. And then you can just mulch right over it. Once you need to plant, you could just move the mulch out of the way, dig your hole, plant your plant, and then cover it back up with the mulch. This changes everything, doesn't it? If you do not have to first remove your sod or have to use a tiller to dig up, you can do this relatively fast. You just first have to source your cardboard. There are a ton of ways you can source cardboard. You can put a feeler out on the internet and ask people for free cardboard. You can go to grocery stores and ask them for their free cardboard. Some landfills have a section dedicated just to cardboard. You can go there and ask if you can get some. So the point is cardboard is relatively easy to source. Get some cardboard and put it directly on the grass. The next step is you need to mulch that cardboard. Otherwise, it's going to disintegrate too quickly or it's going to fly away because it's going to dry out and the wind is going to get it. You need to mulch it. One, to keep the cardboard down and add to the layer that's going to kill your grass. But two, because you want to make the new flower bed that you're creating look nice. For us, this was the most expensive part of the project, but by expensive, I mean it cost us about $120 to get enough mulch to do our entire yard. There are ways to get your mulch entirely for free. There are these websites where you can sign up to be paired with one of those tree cutting companies. Evidently, these tree cutting companies, after they cut the trees, they mulch them or chip them, and they are looking for somewhere to get rid of them. And so these companies will pair you with them where they will come and drop off these wood chips on your property for you to use. I have tried to use one of those services before and didn't have a lot of luck. But what my husband and I did do is as we were driving down the road, we saw a tree company cutting down a tree and we called them and we asked them if they would drop off a load of mulch at our house. And they've done that a number of times. That's one way you can do it. When we did this specific project that I'm telling you about, we did not yet know about the service where you can be paired with a tree cutting company. What we did instead is we contacted a tree mill. So these are the people that take entire trees and they mill them into wood to be able to be worked into all sorts of construction projects. As they're milling the tree, they shave off a lot of the bark and things like that, and they chip it as well. And so we contacted them and asked if we could buy some of this from them, and they were happy to sell us a truckload and a trailer load for about $20. I think we ended up getting about 5 trailer loads from them. And if my pricing is right, it was only about $100 to $120 that we spent in getting enough mulch to mulch this entire property. The tree mill company where we got our mulch 4 or 5 years ago no longer does it at such a low price. They've raised it quite a bit. When we contacted them last year, it was about 50 or 60 bucks per scoop or something like that, which made it no different from going out and buying regular mulch. But I'm telling you this to say, although mine no longer is doing it, you might check with tree mill companies in your area and see if they're willing to sell you some mulch for a decent price. The main reason we're doing this is to start flower beds that we intend to plant later. We're not going to worry about the plantings right now. You're going to take it as you have resources and as you have time. But the good news for you is that this is actually a pretty great way to start a garden bed because if you wait a year or so to plant it, all of that mulch will have disintegrated and will have fed your soil. This is especially true of the mulch that you get from a tree cutting company. This is because when they cut a tree and they chip the tree, they don't just chip the bark, but they also chip the leaves. And if you know anything about how compost is made, you know that to make compost, you need green material, which typically comes from leaves, And then you also need brown material, which typically comes from the bark of a tree. And so mix those two together and leave that in a pile, and that material will compost relatively quickly. And so if you take that material and you start a no-dig garden bed with it, and you leave it alone for a while, especially if you live in an area that gets regular raindrop throughout the year, it will compost. And once it does that after a year or so, when you go plant into it, your soil will have been improved drastically and you will have gotten a head start into your plantings. On that note, I should caution you, if you're using that material from a tree cutting company, because that soil has the capacity to compost, this would mean that if you plant into it straight away, especially things that has short roots, so things like perennials or annuals, their roots may get burnt in that material. And so you really do want to hold off on planting into those flower beds. Or what you can do is you can plant shrubs into it that have deeper roots. So maybe shrubs that come from like a 3-gallon container, because the roots are going to be much further down into the soil, away from where the materials are composting. So on the other hand, though, if you're using the mulch that comes from a mill, now we're talking about mainly the bark of the tree. So this is mainly brown material. It's not going to compost or disintegrate nearly as quickly. At that point, it's acting as mulch mostly, and you can get away with planting more things in it, including annuals or perennials. I'm telling you this from experience. However, the professionals would say that that material, because it hasn't fully dried out yet, can leach nitrogen from the soil. That's a debate for science. I'm telling you from experience, I've not had trouble planting directly in those flower beds as long as it was real mulch or mulch that came from a tree mill company where they primarily use the bark and not a combination of the bark and the leaves. Do you have any experience with this? I know that the no dig method of creating flower beds has become relatively popular here lately, and I'm glad for it. But I want to encourage you to take that to a bigger level and do it to your entire garden. But remember that for that, you do need to first have your garden design plan. I'm going to link that video right here where I went into great detail explaining the steps you should take to try to decide what you even want to put in your yard. I encourage you to watch it. And once you come up with a plan, come back to this video and rewatch it and get busy.